Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest. Now, we have a fairly interesting guest. When I say fairly, because I always say we have interesting guests because we try to find them. But in this case, I think we have a real winner. Russ Sharer is with us. Welcome, Russ.
Thanks, Don. It's great to be with you today.
Well, you have a new book and you have some interesting things. But first, as we always ask our guests, tell us a little bit about your personal background, then about your company, then about your book, and finally a website where you can find more
Sure.
information.
All right. Well, um, I have been in industry for 35 plus years, mostly in telecommunications. Was a part of some large companies. Ericsson is a known name, Rockwell is a known name, and also some startups. And so I've been where probably a lot of your listeners are, where it's a handful of people sitting around a table, and we've got to do everything from create a new product to find customers to make sure the bathrooms get cleaned and the trash gets emptied. It's just a part of small businesses, and I love to be a part of it. When it comes to my current company, for about the last 5 years, I have been a part of the Brooks Group. The Brooks Group is a 40-year-old organization that does training. We primarily focus on business-to-business companies, helping them to get more out of their sales organizations. Everyone knows how to sell, but we find there's a whole lot of techniques and skills that can help improve that. And so that's really what we've done. What we saw was that the COVID, the pandemic that came along, accelerated a number of trends that were already happening. And so we wanted to document some of those trends. We actually found 6 of them in our book. But a couple of them are really specific now as we think about the supply chain crisis that we're in. The supply chain seems to be the answer to every problem, or at least the reason for every problem in a lot of businesses today. And in talking to our customers and talking to their dealers, we've learned a lot, we've heard a lot, and are offering some what we think is pretty practical advice in terms of how do we keep customer satisfaction as high as it can be when the products aren't always there when they were originally promised.
Oh, okay. So you brought up a book. What's the name of your book and where can people get it?
Our book is called Agile and Resilient: Sales Leadership for the New Normal.
Well, if you have a
It's
book,
available.
if you have a copy, put it up there.
Oh, okay. Let me show you. There's the book, Agile and Resistant.
Right.
That's what happens when you blur your background, but it's got a blue and orange cover. Can be found at Amazon.com. But can also be located on our website, which is Brooks Group, BROOKSGROUP.com. And you can get it either place. And it documents this trend. It's very data-driven, both with customer analysis and some generic market data in the business-to-business world that we've done, as well as interviews and anecdotes. And it's co-written by a woman whose name is Michelle Richardson. She is the VP of the Sales Performance Research Center at the Brooks Group. She focuses on the data and the research, and I work with a lot of customers and tell their stories.
Okay. So having said that, you said there were 6 things that you learned, but you had 2 in particular that you wanted to talk about. So
yeah. Well, again, in this day of supply chain shortages or price increases, which is the other part that's there, our natural tendency and the natural tendency of some salespeople is to hold back, to not be as proactive in terms of communicating those, or they may just feel a little beat up. They may feel like, boy, every time I go out and tell somebody bad news, it just hurts. And we're encouraging people to just kind of keep on pressing on in terms of being transparent about what's happening, trying to understand from your vendors as appropriate, what are the delays. People want reasons. They want to know, they really want to know when. They can't know when, they want to know why. And so we really encourage folks to reach back into their supply chain and understand. I'll give you an example. I was working with a client of ours around price increases, and He said, well, we're going out, we're looking for our annual price increases. And I said, well, why are you raising prices? This was last year before some of the worst shortages. And he said, well, it's January. We always raise prices in January. And I said, no, that's not a reason. I said, that's a time, it's a month. You've got to have some better reason for that. And so we worked and talked a little bit, and there were some supply chain raw materials costs that had gone up. There were personnel costs that had gone up, and crafted the argument of like, well, here's why the prices are going up. So being transparent is really a key one. Second part of that is communicating proactively. Bad news. What's the old adage? Was it Mark Twain who said that both fish and guests, start to smell after about 3 days?
Yeah.
News doesn't get better. I worked for a great boss one time who made that very clear, that the news itself, if it's bad, should get delivered as quickly as possible. And that when there's a price increase, you've got to be candid about it. You've got to go meet with them, have the conversation. And if there's alternatives, propose them. If there are options in terms of different ways to get delivery, you've got to be thinking from the user's perspective, the buyer's perspective. What's the job they're trying to get done, and how do you help them do that? Talked to someone the other day who was focused on, they had a vendor who was doing partial shipments to them. And they said, you know what, partial shipments don't help at all, because partial shipments for us is an invoice 30 days later without any ability for us to deliver it to the customer. So listen really carefully to your channel if you're working through a sales channel. And then, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to bring in the famous Godfather thing where the Hollywood producer said he wasn't going to give the role, and Tom Hagen said he had to go to New York to deliver. So I heard that recently in relation to exactly what you're saying. But I'd like to stop you one moment and ask you a question. It seems to me what I keep hearing is, well, it's a supply chain and tough. To me, that's not an answer.
Yep.
I mean, I over the weekend we heard it 3 different places, and I'm saying to myself, but you're not answering my question. What are you going to do for me?
Sure. Well, and that's where the information needs to come. Sometimes there's nothing you can do, right? The ugliest part of this whole situation right now, especially if you are buying raw materials or you're buying a finished product to incorporate, you're kind of at their mercy. Now, you can look for alternative suppliers. Sometimes that'll help. Sometimes your suppliers will help you out. We talked with someone the other day who was stepping in and loaning equipment, loaning some solutions temporarily until the final one showed up. That creativity around, if you think about what are the real deadlines your clients are facing, and how do you then help them meet those or get as close as they can to it without sort of the optimal solution being business as usual. I produce it, I hand it off to somebody. So it's a time for creative thinking, I think, in a lot of cases.
But how do you choose? You've got 5 different people who need your product, and you only have enough for 3. How do you choose?
Well, again, there's no one answer for that. You've got to go back to the particular values or what you think is important. Usually people will rank things like biggest customers or most significant customers to you, greatest need that they might have. I might be able to, if I can only produce 10 units and I have a customer who wants all 10, they may be able to survive a while with just 4, so I can service 6 other customers. The whole idea of allocation is a winless strategy, because somebody's not going to get what they want. But there's sometimes ways you can optimize in terms of what looks best. And I think it starts with a good conversation with the customer. I was talking to, again, a client of ours the other day, and he said, our people are numb because everybody is telling this, especially in the construction industry. And so if everyone is telling them that, it might be that there's a natural delay in terms of really needing your product. They're willing to wait another couple of weeks if that solves the problem. But it's a full-time job. In my experience, when we've been on allocation, when I worked in industry, we had a full-time person whose job it was to manage allocation. who would come to a morning meeting to talk about what production we really thought we were going to have to be able to ship that day, what were the most pressing orders, and we made tough trade-offs to do that. We would also have sometimes the executives of the companies call them because we wanted them to know we were doing everything we could, but based on everything that we had, we weren't going to be able to fulfill their order on time. The other thing to be careful of here is sometimes you see clients who start to do over ordering. And so if you're not careful, you end up with a lot of artificial backlog that as soon as supply chain starts again, all of a sudden it disappears and wanders off. Don, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's a great simulation called the Beer Distributors simulation. Have you heard about this?
I've heard about it, but I've never seen it.
If you just Google the Beer Distributor simulation, but it starts with somebody in a bar requesting kind of a special beer, and it turns out that was a beer with not much demand typically, and so the bar orders some extra units. Well, because it wasn't used much, it kind of goes all the way back through distribution, through the master distributor, all the way back to manufacturer. And everybody says, gee, I haven't thought about this. I'm going to bump it up a little bit. I'm going to bump it up a little bit. I'm going to bump it up a little bit. Before you know it, they've converted this big swath of production based on, one bar and one guy saying, hey, can I have a couple of beers? Or maybe it's around a retail establishment. But the point is that you have to be very careful the inputs you use, because don't overweight certain things. Make sure that you're talking to your customers. Don't be encouraging over ordering, because that becomes a mess on the other side where you end up with a lot of extra inventory.
Well, let me ask you this. I have a feeling, and again, it's only a feeling based on who I talk to, that, for instance, all of a sudden we have a lumber shortage. Nothing's changed. And, maybe there's a greater demand for housing, but, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, we had overcapacity in the industry. Now all of a sudden we have an undercapacity. Is it possible that there is some gerrymandering going on here in this world?
Well, I would never deny human beings' ability to try and seek extra profit along the chain. So I can't just say no, of course not. But I think that, and this is one of the things we did with a client recently, was we actually did some tracking back in terms of what were the bottlenecks in the supply chain. And they can be created in a number of different spots. I can't remember if it was the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, did an expose of a board game manufacturer and what happened. And it went all the way back to their manufacturer in China. And yes, they manufactured offshore. But because of power shortages that were being exhibited in a certain place, they had to go from 3 shifts to 1 shift. That created issues getting raw production through. Then it was getting capacity at docks and ports. The friends I know in the logistics industry say it's taking twice as long now to get a ship from China to the US as it used to. Then it sat in the port because they couldn't get it offloaded, and then they couldn't find capacity to be able to put it on a truck and haul it anywhere. So all of those little pieces kind of added up. Now, does your customer care that you're having all those bottlenecks? No. Interesting maybe to know about them. But how can you look at alternative suppliers or think of different ways to deliver it? The movement to air freight, for example, might be better than putting it on the ocean. Those are the kind of problems we've got to have. We tell a story in the book about in August, one of the major ports in China shut down for 2 weeks because of COVID. When that happened, if you were in the retail business, that alone could have put your Christmas sales in jeopardy. So we talk about transparency, meaning you've got to be able to let your customers know all the way back, and you've got to expect from your vendors all the way back capability. Where is it sourcing and where are the bottlenecks? The lumber one you bring out is an interesting one, especially. We work with a number of folks in the building and construction industry, and yes, demand dipped, production was cut. We then put tariffs on products coming in from Canada, where a lot of the lumber and parts of this country come from. That slowed down production. It took jobs away from the Canadians. The Canadians migrate to other jobs. Before you know it, now it's getting all those people back. And if there's one thing I think your listeners know, it's hard to hire people right now. Every business I talked to said that the pool of even semi-qualified people is really small.
But the other side of the argument, 2.5 years ago on this program, I had a government official who admitted that there were 16.5 million people who didn't have jobs and who were not receiving jobless benefits. And I'm trying to figure out what happened to them. All of a sudden, they're gone. But anyway, that's you sound like an expert, so I'm asking you.
Well, boy, you've now asked me to move from the idea of how do I help companies with sales to how do I talk about the political job situation. And I don't know that I'm qualified.
We don't talk politics here.
Yeah, I know. So I think that we've had people leave the workforce over COVID. I think that people just are tired and have retired, or you've got some moms who are staying home. I think I think having had less immigration typically over the last 4 years has impacted opening, starter jobs. And at least in our community here in California, jobs that would normally be sort of starter jobs are paying are paying a lot more. And so people are moving in different directions, or maybe in some cases just working less. They're working one job instead of two. So it's a complex problem. And again, not my area of expertise. Well, I'll tell you a funny, if you want a funny story though, I'll tell you a funny story. I was talking to a guy who said that every morning his competitors sit at the gas stations and wait for his trucks to roll in. And while the guy's pumping gas into the company truck, they try to recruit his people for $1 or $2 an hour more. So it's a tough market out there.
Well, the interesting thing is a truck driver can now make more than a college graduate on average. Yeah. But let's get back. The name of your book again and the name of your companies before people forget it.
Sure. The name of the book is Agile and Resilient. And so we apply sort of what's happening from a change management and sales management perspective. And the name of the company is the Brooks Group. The website is BROOKSGROUP.com.
Okay, on that point, Russ, let's go back. You said there were two. We butchered one. Let's give you a chance to hit the second.
Well, I don't know if you butchered it or not. Second one is really how do you hold on to the people that you've got? There is pressure both for them to quit and go elsewhere. We've been hearing from a lot of folks who are those sort of starter 20, early 30, who are saying, I don't want to go back in the office if they've been working remotely, or someone told me the other day they were tired. They'd been losing receptionists because their customers are calling, screaming at them every day, and they just don't want to deal with the stress. And one of the things that we found is people tend to leave when they feel like the culture, like the environment that they're working in is not one of connection. Patrick Lencioni, who's a great author around leadership, says that individuals and employees don't quit companies, they quit managers. And so just as we're having to be open and transparent and creative in terms of how we take care of our customers during this time, we need to do the same thing towards our employees. You need to be talking to them to make sure that they're okay. You might need some creativity or flexibility for certain folks. I think this whole idea of we're not coming back the way it was, we're going to be in the office 3 days a week for certain folks is a part of that. If your person's on the front line, customer service, and they're getting screamed at a lot, maybe you buy them lunch and you just have lunch once a day, or maybe once a month, you do something special to let them know they're appreciated. Yes, where you sit as the owner, it's tough. Where they sit getting the anger from a lot of different things, but especially about the orders if they're slow, is also tough because they don't feel like they have any power or authority. And so respect them, tell them the truth, encourage them, make sure they don't have a reason to leave you as a manager more than anything else.
That's a pretty good thought. But let me ask you this question. I mean, it's very difficult being a customer service person. Um, but on the other side of it, isn't there a responsibility of the customer service person to try to solve the problem?
There absolutely is. But if the problem is that they can't ship what they're supposed to ship and they're not involved in the allocation decision, it's a no-win, right? And so um, helping them to understand and again, be able to communicate kind of what's there. If they can solve it, give them the tools to solve it. You wouldn't be surprised how many folks we talk to where things have to get escalated to the manager. I was working with a major company the other day. I placed an order on the website. I wanted to cancel the order. They didn't allow a customer service person to do that. They had to bring a manager in. And so by the time I got to that first level manager, I was frustrated. A, it wasn't electronically cancelable, and two, the person I waited for couldn't solve my problem. So think about what kind of problems you're hearing and see if you can give your people tools to solve those. Again, those are all good customer practices, but it also helps from an employee retention perspective.
What do you think about the fact that a manager should be a customer service person for 1 or 2 hours to really learn it?
I think that's a great idea. I think that if you put yourself in their shoes for 2 hours, you're going to have much greater understanding of the kind of issues they go through. And I think that they'll appreciate the fact that somebody came down and did that job. And a couple hours on the phone will give you real ability to maybe understand what they need or from the tools perspective. And by the way, when you go on the phone, don't tell them that you're the company owner. You're just, there to help them and use the same tools as your CS person, right? If they can't make a decision at that moment to give a rebate or a credit, don't you do that. Work within their rules so that you understand what they're dealing with.
Okay, I have to tell you that I suggested that to the president of the company, apparently, and he looked at me aghast and said, he actually said, "Me do that?" I sold the stock immediately.
I was going to say, if you're not willing to do it, what does that say about what you think they're dealing with, right?
Yes. Russ Sharer, your book one more time.
It's called Agile and Resilient. The book is Sales Leadership for the New Normal. You can get it at Amazon.com or go to our website, which is Brooks Group, BROOKS Group, GROUP.com.
Okay. Russ, what would you like to leave our audience with today?
I think the big thing that I would just encourage everyone on is it's not going back to the way it was 3 years ago. We're different people. Your employees are different. Your customers are different. And so I call it one of the big 5 lies of sales, that it's just going to go back. And so I don't need to change. The companies who adapt, the companies who are thinking about what this is going to look like going forward. Yes, we'll get through the supply chain. We'll get through inflation. We'll get through the Ukrainian situation, but there'll be something else. There always is. Challenge yourself to think about how do we really keep this company and change it going forward. And that's what the book's about, is like we give you these 6 trends and encourage you to be thinking about how they impact you over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, on that note, Russ Sharer, we say thank you for a very illuminating time.
Thank you.